Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you from the Fulmination Content Creator Test server with another look at some of the missing ships from the live server in EVE Echoes. Now in the past we've had a look at the Tech VI Electronic Warfare frigates, we've had a look at the Command Destroyers, so today it felt right to start going up the scale and have a look at some of the Tech VIII Electronic Warfare cruisers. So this is going to be things like the Arbitrator E-War, the Bellicose E-War, the Blackbird E-War, and the Celestis E-War. Now these are Tech VIII ships that you can see on the live server if you're flying in Tech VIII Anomalies or Tech VIII Encounters. They can spawn in those. There's no way to actually fly them yourself though on live currently, although they are hinted at in some of the skins. If you have a look through those you can see some of these ships. So what we're going to do today then is have a look at what these ships are, what they do, and whether or not they're going to be worth your time when they're added to the game. Now of course this does come with the addendum that I am on the Fulmination Content Creator Test server here. We are going to be looking at ships that do not appear on the ship trees and do not appear in the market tabs. You have to know the codes to pull one of these out of existence, and we can have a look at its statistics. Now that does mean of course that these are subject to change. There is every possibility that when these are launched on the live server, the stats and the attributes and that kind of thing may have changed somewhat from what you see here, but of course we've got this information, we can just go with this and hopefully this will be somewhat close to what it'll be on live. Anyway, if you do enjoy this video, let me know by hitting like on it, sub to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, ding that notification bell to never miss an upload, and let me know in the comment section down below what ships and topics you want to see me cover in future videos. I am releasing a new video every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I usually take Saturday and Sunday off, unless obviously something goes wrong during the week. If you do want to go the extra mile to help support this channel as well, you can come join us on Patreon, or you can check out our Redbubble merchandise store if you've ever fancied representing either the Catskull Academy or like the Silent Rose. There's some cool designs on there. You can get on everything from t-shirts to water bottles to laptop skins and more. Anyway, this video also is going to have this week's Combo Omega giveaway, so 2 lucky winners will each win 1 month of Combo Omega. Do stay tuned, keep watching, and keep an eye out for when that pops up. Anyway, that said and done then folks, let's jump right in to talking about the Tech VIII E-War cruisers. The first of these that we're going to have a look at then is the Blackbird E-War. Now this being a Tech VIII Blackbird, it's worth mentioning that there is another Tech VIII Blackbird as well, which of course is the Blackbird Interdictor. Those are available on the live server, so we're going to be comparing the Blackbird E-War to the Blackbird Interdictor, and we'll be doing the same thing with the Celestis, the Bellicose, and the Arbitrator, looking at both the E-War variants and the Interdictor as kind of a side-by-side comparison. Now of course the E-War variants are based more around the electronic warfare aspect, tied to that particular hull, and with the Blackbird that is going to be guidance disruptors. I do actually think the Blackbird is a fairly underutilized hull, mainly because if you're going into a solo combat situation and you want a cruiser that uses missiles, the choice between a Blackbird or a Bellicose tends to come down to the Bellicose winning, simply because the Bellicose obviously uses target painters which benefit its own missiles, whereas the Blackbird is kind of the inverse of that. Whereas the Bellicose makes its own missiles better, the Blackbird of course is going to be using guidance disruptors to make your opponent's missiles worse. This gives it some distinct advantages in PvP and fleets, so certainly the Blackbird E-War is the kind of ship you're going to be wanting to use more if you're fleeting up with other people, both for PvE or PvP, or if you're going into combat anomalies up against Caldari ships, for example, where you're going to have a lot of missiles and those guidance disruptors are going to do the full work. Anyway, to look at the attributes and fittings here. First of all, looking at that fitting profile, the Blackbird E-War has 1 drone tube that can launch either small or medium drones. We've got 4 high slots, 4 mid slots, and 4 low slots, followed by 3 combat and engineering rigs. Now, the difference here between the E-War and the Interdictor version comes down to the mid and low slots. Here we've got 4 mids and 4 lows, whereas on the Interdictor we only have 3 mids, but we do get 5 lows. So the Interdictor is going to have a bit more tank and possibly things like some weapon upgrade modules and that kind of thing, whereas the E-War version here gets more in the way of mid slots, which makes sense, you know, because if we're going to be fitting things like guidance disruptors, obviously those take up those mid slots, so having more mid slots means more E-War potential. And of course you can either use those to stack on top of each other and have 2 or 3 of these, which can either be hitting different ships or the same ship as required, or you can have other stuff in there as well. Anyway, looking at the rest of the statistics here, the power grid is exactly the same between the Interdictor and the E-War at 750, as is the capacitor. Both of those are 2,720. Defensively speaking, the Blackbird E-War is slightly better than the Interdictor. The E-War here has 13,012 defense, whereas the Blackbird Interdictor only has 10,534. Now, the E-War is also slightly smaller, and it is slightly faster. It's a 96.1 meter signature radius compared to 98.1 on the Interdictor, and it's 250 meters per second, down from 259. So sorry, it's a little bit smaller, but it's also a touch slower, which means it kind of almost counterbalances. I would argue that the E-War is probably going to be more difficult to hit than the Interdictor, but it's going to be fairly close either way. Now, the scan resolution has gone down on these. As you'd expect, an Interdictor needs to lock onto something quickly in order to lock it in position. So scan resolution on the Blackbird Interdictor is 351, whereas it's only 309 here on the E-War. Now, the difference then does come in regards to mass and the inertia modifier. Now, the inertia modifier has gone from 0.36 up to 0.4, which isn't a huge change, but the mass has gone down from 13.19 to 12.73. Now, that actually means that the E-War variant here is slightly more manoeuvrable. It's ever so slightly slower, it is smaller, but it is considerably more manoeuvrable. Well, I say considerably, it's noticeably more manoeuvrable. Now, when it comes to the skills as well, you'll see that these are, for the most part, improvements or at least the same. So if we're looking at advanced signal disruption here, on the Blackbird Interdictor, the guidance disruption strength and guidance disruption optimal range were both 5% increases per level for a 25% overall, whereas here it's 7.5% increase, which is a 37.5% increase across the board. We do also here get a 7.5% increase to warp disruptor optimal range, which is a new skill added onto the E-War version that is not present on the Blackbird Interdictor. Below this, under Advanced Cruiser Command, we're getting an increase of 10% to our sensor strength, which currently, as far as I can tell, does nothing in Eve Echoes, and we're getting medium missile torpedo damage, notably not small, medium, or large. It is just missile torpedo damage, increase of 7.5%, which again is the same as the Interdictor, and it's worth noting that that doesn't care for size. If you want to put small missiles on a Blackbird, it is going to get that 7.5, 37.5 at full training increase to those missiles. Same if you want to try and cram some large missiles on there, they are going to get those bonuses just as medium ones would. Now, in fairness, for the most part with the Blackbird, you're probably only going to be wanting to fit mediums anyway, because why would you fit small missiles when you can fit rapids on a Blackbird? Would kind of be the question, but it does mean if you want to try and cram some larger missiles in there, if you think that that power grid can take it, which, spoiler alert, it really can't, you do at least get the bonuses there. So across the board, it's a bit of a different ship. Its combat potential, I would argue, is pretty much the same. The main difference that you're going to notice between changing from the E-War to the Interdictor or vice versa is that the E-War is slightly tankier in its basic defences, but the Interdictor gets more low slots, which can make it considerably tankier. The E-War, on the other hand, then, does get those increases to its guidance disruption strength. So if you're going to be using guidance disruptors, the Blackbird E-War is going to be a big increase there. So between the Interdictor and the E-War, you can see that in fleets they're going to be doing very different things. For solo, I would argue the Interdictor is possibly still going to be the better option, but it's kind of neither here nor there. If you've got the E-War and you want to use it for solo, you're probably going to do about as well as you would with the Interdictor, though the Interdictor I think will pull ever so slightly ahead over the E-War for solo play. That said, if you've got the E-War because you're using it in fleets, just stick with that. I don't think you're necessarily going to need to train into both. The Celestis is probably one of the weirdest looking ship hulls in the entirety of the EVE universe. I once likened it to a Hoover that swallowed a banana, and I still cannot think of a better description for it. It is just a weird looking ship. And the Celestis E-War, of course, is no different. It uses that same hull, but with a Devol Labs kind of, that sort of golden browny skin colour to it, which quite frankly doesn't improve the look all that much in my opinion. Anyway, we're not here to talk about the looks, we are here to talk about statistics. So, like the Blackbird before it, the Celestis E-War has the same fitting profile of one drone tube that can launch small or medium, 4 highs, 4 mids and 4 lows, alongside 3 combat and 3 engineering rigs. The difference between the Celestis E-War and the Celestis Interdictor comes in the mids and the lows, in that the Interdictor has 5 lows, but only 3 mids. So the Interdictor gets that little bit more tank, and like possibility there of putting in more tanking options in the modules and the low slots there, whereas the E-War, of course, being an electronic warfare ship, is going to have more in the way of electronic warfare in the mid slots. Now, of course, the Celestis is a Galente ship, so it does suffer from the fact that its E-War is the almost useless sensor dampener, which I know a lot of you are like, you know, yeah, what's the point in sensor dampeners? And outside of very explicit situations where you want to be able to force someone to relock onto drones and things like that, there's not really all that much use for them, truth be told. I think the sensor dampeners need a massive change. Developers really need to have a look at those and figure out what the hell they can do to make those better. I know they've said they don't want to change the lock-on range, that sensor dampeners would make you lock on at a shorter range. And quite frankly, the lock-on range is set to a default of 1,000 kilometers anyway, so chances are you're going to be able to lock on it. If someone's on grid, you can lock onto them, is the point. Which means if you wanted sensor dampeners to affect that, it's going to massively have to shorten it. You know, it's going to, it's insane. It's insane. There's a problem there, and I've no idea what the answer is. Otherwise, though, again, the Interdictor and the E-War variants both share the same power grid of 750 megawatts. They both have the same capacitor bank of 2,720 with the same maximum capacitor recharge time. Everything there is exactly the same. The defense changes, as I've said with the Blackbird Interdictor as well, same thing. We've got the Interdictor here for the Celestis sits at 10,901, whereas the E-War sits at 13,463. So that is an increase, but of course we've lost a low slot, which means you're probably going to have less repairers and resistances and things like that put into the Celestis, so those kind of balance each other out. Obviously, if you're not wanting to fit tanking modules anyway, then the E-War is just going to be a tankier ship on the sheer dint that it's got 3,000 additional hit points. As we go further down, the signature radius has again gone down. 94.5 drops to 92.5 here on the E-War, but the flight velocity drops with it. 280 meters per second on the Interdictor, 270 meters per second here on the E-War variant. So it's a slightly smaller, slightly slower ship. It then has the mass here is exactly the same, and the inertia modifier has gone up. So this time around, the Celestis E-War is actually more cumbersome than the Interdictor variant, whereas the Blackbird and the E-War is slightly more agile than the Interdictor. Here on the Celestis, it's the other way around. The Interdictor is the more agile of the two, and it gets a better lock-on, 386 on the Interdictor, only 340 here on the E-War. So overall, slightly tankier ship, very slightly smaller as well, but you're getting that additional mid-slot. On paper, the Interdictor does kind of come out ahead, other than obviously the fact that if you want those 4 mid-slots, then the E-War is going to be the one that serves your needs. As we look at the skills here, advanced signal disruption, again, this was a sensor damper strength of 5% and a sensor damper optimal range of 5%. Those have both increased to 7.5%, so going from 25% at full training up to 37.5%. It's a big boost to a useless system, so that's obviously going to be a problem here with the Celestis. It does now get the additional here Energy Nosferatu optimal range increase of 7.5% per level, so if you want to brawl with a Celestis and sort of solo play, then yeah, the Celestis E-War arguably is slightly better at getting extra range with its Nosferatu. Again, I find these skills don't really improve the range of a Nosferatu all that much. They're fairly short range to begin with, so it doesn't mean that you can go from a brawler that uses a Nosferatu to suddenly having a kiter that uses Nosferatu. It's only a matter of a few kilometers. It just makes it slightly more efficient rather than adding whole new possibilities. Still, nice to have. And then Advanced Cruiser Command, again, this is the same between both the Celestis Interdictor and the Celestis E-War. A 5% increase to scan resolution, which is nice, helps you lock on that a little bit faster, and a 7.5% increase to turret damage. Now notice that says turret. Again, whether you put small, medium, or large turrets, that will increase, be increased by this skill. Couldn't think of the word there. And again, it doesn't matter if it's cannons, if it's lasers, if it's railguns, or if it's decomposers. All 4 of those will get bonuses here from the Celestis skill bonuses. Now, it's worth mentioning, because some people have asked in the past, does that include things like mining lasers or strip miners? Well, 1, you can't put a strip miner on a Celestis because it doesn't have the skill, and 2, no, it does not affect mining lasers. Whilst I suppose they technically are turrets, as far as the game's concerned, the definition of turret is anything that is standard combat laser, cannons, decomposers, or railguns. So unfortunately, mining lasers don't work there. So to wrap up the Celestis, compared with the Celestis in the Interdictor and the E-War, it's kind of hard to say that the Interdictor is arguably a better ship in everything other than its E-War functionality, which I suppose is the point, really, of the Celestis E-War. If you want to be using sensor dampeners, then the Celestis E-War is going to be a better option for you, but considering how useless sensor dampeners are right now, I don't see the Celestis E-War getting much use at all. If you like the Celestis hull, and, you know, power to you for going for the weirdest ship in the game, ultimately, the Interdictor is going to be better in almost every function that you could possibly think of for it. And I just can't think of why you'd ever want sensor dampeners. Until we want sensor dampeners, unfortunately, the Celestis E-War is pretty much a useless ship. Sad to say, but that's just the truth. That's how I see it. Maybe I'm missing something. Let me know in the comments. Following on from the frankly disappointing Celestis E-War, we come to the Arbitrator E-War, and this is one that I actually think will see a good amount of use when it's added to the game. The Arbitrator hull is a very popular hull anyway, with it being a drone cruiser, plus it being a little bit more interesting than perhaps the Vexor and the Vexor Navy issue. Those are, of course, heavy drone cruisers, good at just kicking out damage with the drones, whereas the Arbitrator line does still use drones to good effect, but does so in a, I personally feel, more creative way. Now, if we're going to look at the Arbitrator E-War and compare it to the Arbitrator Interdictor, first thing to look at, of course, is the fitting profile. Again, the E-War, compared to the Interdictor, has the same amount of drone tubes, 4 drone launching tubes that can take either small or medium. They've both got 2 high slots, and they've both got 3 combat rigs and 3 engineering rigs. But again, it's the mid slots and the low slots that change. The E-War variant here gets an additional mid slot going from 3 to 4, but it loses a low slot going from 5 down to 4. Now, on paper, that means, of course, you're going to have more options with your electronic warfare, but you are going to have a decrease in your possible tankiness. Obviously, if you're fitting things like, you know, hardeners and repairers, etc., you've only got 4 slots to do so here on the E-War, compared to having 5 on the Interdictor. That is then counterbalanced, however, by the fact that the E-War here has an increase in its raw defense, 13,972 here on the E-War, whereas the Interdictor only had 11,312. Like the other ships though, the power grid and the capacitors are identical. We've got 579 megawatts of power grid on both the Interdictor and the E-War, and we've got 2,473 gigajoules. Again, that is the same on the Interdictor and the E-War version. As we come further down, the scan resolution has dropped from 393 down to 346, the signature radius has dropped from 89 to 87.1, and the flight velocity has dropped as well from 284 down to 274. So what you have here is a ship that does take a little bit longer to lock on. It is slightly smaller, but it's slightly slower, and those kind of balance each other out again to a certain point. And if we have a look then at the mass and inertia, the mass of the Interdictor was an 11.2 million kilograms with a 0.42 inertia modifier, whereas here the mass has gone up to 11.81 million kilograms, but the inertia has dropped to 0.4. That's pretty much comparable. There's not much of a difference. You're not going to notice a difference between those two ships as far as agility goes. You are going to be slightly smaller, but as I said, slightly slower. As far as the paper things go here, your main difference is the fact that you are naturally a little bit tankier, so you may not feel the need to fit as many sort of tanking modules in those low slots, which could free you up for damage. If you're going for an Arbitrator as kind of a brawling build, then you might find that, you know, having that extra damage counteracts the fact that you don't have the additional tank in the low slots. If you were only using 2 tanking modules, one aggressor module and 1 propulsion module, only using 4 low slots slots anyway, you can still get away with that. It depends if that 5th low slot was actually important to your particular playstyle, and if it's worth swapping out for a 4th mid slot. Now, of course, with the Arbitrator, the mid-slots are tracking disruptors. Now, that means if you're doing a Mar, Galente, or Minmatar PvE encounters and anomalies, you can actually use all 4 of those mid-slots to fit tracking disruptors and screw with your opponent's turrets. The fact that you can hit 4 ships with high-power tracking disruptors is actually really powerful. It means you can make 4 ships per wave very difficult to hit you, make it so that they really struggle to actually get a bead on you. That is basically you can take 4 ships out of the fight per encounter. That's an incredibly powerful ability. If you go for all 4 mid slots, you may find that actually you want to just do 2 or 3 of those and fit other things in the mid slots as well, but we'll talk about that in a second. Now, this is mainly thanks to the fact the Arbitrator E-War, of course, gets improved bonuses to its tracking disruptors. The Interdictor had a 5% increase to tracking disruptor strength and a 5% increase to the optimal range of them, whereas here on the E-War, that's a 7.5% increase to each of those. That's a difference of 25% at full training and 37.5% at full training, so you can see it's a considerable difference there in how well your tracking disruptors operate and how well you can screw with the opposing fleet. Now, this does also come with the additional bonus here of the Energy Neutralizer optimal range. Now, again, I've said before, when it comes to things like Energy Neutralizer and Energy Nosferatu optimal range bonuses, they're not all that much. Even a 37.5% increase, it's still a short-range weapon, so it's not going to suddenly go from being able to be used with short-range weapons and now being on a kiting build, but it is nice to have it more effective from slightly further away. It's about efficiency and effectiveness rather than suddenly opening new doors. Now, that of course is in place of otherwise the Interdictor has the bonus to the size of the bubble, which would be useless here to have on the E-War, so they've swapped that for additional Energy Neutralizer optimal range. Now, that means that in a fleet PvP action, the Arbitrator E-War actually becomes quite scary. You get that additional range with the Neutralizer, which means you can neutralize any ship that gets too close to you. Enemy frigates that decide they want to try and take you out and slip under your guns, for example, you can just neutralize them so they can't do anything. Plus, your tracking disruptors then, as I said, can be very powerful in messing with the enemy fleet's turrets. Looking then at Advanced Cruiser Command, like the Interdictor, you're getting exactly the same stats here, 3 km additional drone range, 15 km at full training, and an extra 125% drone DPS at full training too. That's the same across the board there. So what you're getting here, the difference between the Arbitrator Interdictor and the Arbitrator E-War is basically those low slots and those mid slots, and I think the additional mid slot actually really helps out a solo pilot in regards to PvE. If you're keeping range anyway, then you don't need to worry about the fact that you've lost a low slot. You can just keep the additional range and just screw with your opponent's turrets and make sure that they can't hit you anyway. Avoiding damage, I feel, is better than finding a way to absorb that damage better. If you don't get hit in the first place, it doesn't matter, right? That's my theory and how I like to look at things, but that could just be a hangover from me being a frigate pilot and otherwise piloting those small ships. Finally then, the Bellicose E-War, and my goodness, this is a bit of a mixed bag. I absolutely love the Bellicose Covert Ops. The Bellicose Interdictor is also a really powerful ship, but the Bellicose E-War has some really strange decisions that affect how this actually works. Now, the reason I like the Bellicose line so much is because when you've got a ship that's using missiles, and it then has the capability of using target painters, you get this really awesome mix where your E-War directly benefits your own ship and gives you additional damage. On top of that, they're also really small and really fast-moving hulls as far as cruisers go, which makes them surprisingly effective in PvE. I did do a video on the Bellicose Covert Ops, and certainly you should check that one out if these ships interest you. Anyway, looking at the Bellicose E-War and comparing this to the Bellicose Interdictor, of course, let's start with that fitting profile again. We've got 1 drone tube that launches small or mediums, 4 high slots, 4 mid slots, 4 low slots, 3 of each of the rig types. That's, you know, standard. It's what we've seen pretty much across the board with all of these other cruisers as well. Now this, again, when you're comparing the Interdictor to the E-War version, means we're getting an additional mid-slot at the cost of a low slot. Normally that reduces the tankiness, but the defense here on the Bellicose E-War has gone from 10,969 to 13,549, so perhaps that might counteract the fact that you've lost a low slot which could have been a tanking module, and you've put it into the mid-slots instead. The mid-slots, of course, are usually going to be target painters here, which benefit your own missiles. The difference is, though, if you were using 2 target painters before, using 3 of them for solo play isn't going to make much of a difference due to how module stacking penalty works. Means basically that third mid, if you were only running 2 target painters before and you didn't feel the need for an additional mid-slot, like basically you're running, say, 2 target painters and a warp scrambler, there's no need to add in an additional target painter. What you might want to add is a stasis webifier, as we'll come to later, but for the most part, it's the mid-slot here for solo play doesn't really do much. It's when it goes into a fleet that suddenly things become much more powerful, that you've got all those additional options to you. For me, I do like the fact that you get that 4th mid-slot, as we'll talk about later. Below all of this, though, there is an interesting change here. Whereas the Blackbird, Celestis, and Arbitrator have the exact same power grid between the E-War and the Interdictor variants, here the Bellicose E-War dramatically loses power grid. The Bellicose Interdictor has 705 megawatts of power grid, whereas the E-War variant only gets 484. It's lost 230 megawatts of power grid, and that's a humongous drop. I don't know if the Bellicose Interdictor is, much larger than it should be, or if the E-War here has just got a mistake in that drop, but I foresee that could cause some problems when it comes to fitting. It means that some of the missiles that you were going to fit before could really struggle to get on there. I don't know, I haven't honestly run the numbers on that there, if that 484 is suddenly going to cause massive difficulties, but if perhaps you fly a Bellicose Interdictor, let me know in the comment section below if you've got extra excess power grid on your Interdictor, or if you're sort of, sitting here looking at the E-War going, oh my goodness, how on earth am I going to fit this with such little power grid? The capacitor bank, however, is still identical, curiously, 2,285 on both of those. Now, the fact that every other Interdictor and E-War variant have the same power grid and the same capacitor, and the fact that the Bellicose E-War and Bellicose Interdictor have the same capacitor, leads me to believe that one of those is wrong in regards to the power grid. I don't know which one, whether it's the Bellicose has got too much or the E-War here has too little, but we'll see. We'll see. Let me know your thoughts on that one in the comment section below. Signature radius, again, has gone down, 75.4 down from 77, but that does come at the cost of flight velocity going from 313 down to 302, and the scan resolution has dropped quite dramatically as well, from 413 down to 364. Now, this then is, we have the same mass and inertia, so the agility remains the same between the Interdictor and the E-War variant. So again, just to recap, what we've got here is a slightly tankier on paper ship that is slightly smaller, slightly slower, and gets an additional mid-slot at the cost of a low slot. If you found that you didn't really use all of your low slots on the Interdictor, you might find that losing a low slot and getting an additional mid-slot could be really effective. Now, the difference here in regards to the trait description is when it comes to advanced signal disruption, we've gone from, of course, a 5% increase to target painter effects and optimal range to a 7.5% increase, 25% at full training to 37.5. That means your target painters are doing a lot more, blossoming and blooming your target's signature radius quite considerably. Now, the additional skill that we're getting here is a 7.5% increase to stasis webifier optimal range. Now, this is where that additional mid-slot could come in handy for solo play as well. If you're going to fit 2 target painters and to hit things at a distance, if something does start to sneak under your guns, you can then have a warp scrambler and a stasis webifier. Now, stasis webifier is going to have additional range, so you can slow them down from a distance, start hitting them there. Then if they get too close, you can add the warp scrambler on to switch off a micro warp drive as well. So there is a benefit there. It's only to the optimal range of the stasis webifier. I kind of wish it was to the strength instead, but I'm not going to complain too hard on that. That could be a big boost to you if you are otherwise flying one of these and looking for it in PvE. For PvP, of course, you're going to be an excellent target marker, and if anything does happen to get too close, you can slow it down with the additional optimal range there. But again, target painters are one of those things that once you've got more than 2, you don't really need a third. You're all going to be shooting at one target anyway. You don't need to be target painting multiple targets because your fleet should be going through a target priority, and if you've got 2 ships that you're painting, that's just splitting the DPS, so you're only getting half of the damage on target A and half the damage on target B. You only want to be painting 1 ship at a time. So the once you go beyond 2 target painters, the third one starts getting some rather severe stacking penalties. It's kind of like you don't need more than 2 target painters, so getting an additional mid slot on a Bellicose E-War doesn't overly do all that much in regards to fleet, at least my opinion there. Now, the Advanced Cruiser Command bonuses, of course, these are the same between the Interdictor and the E-War. 5% increase to medium missile velocity, so range, and a 10% increase to the damage of those, so 50% increase to damage and 25% increase to range, which is all really quite nice. It's not just range though, of course, it is how fast the missiles travel to their target, which means the time between launching and application of damage is reduced, which means if you can kill a ship with that particular shot, then it's going to die sooner and thus get less damage out to the enemy fleet, that kind of thing. So that's worth noting, but the Bellicose E-War, I honestly think this is a bit of a mixed bag. If you want those target painter effects, which quite frankly you do for PvE, it's going to be a really good ship. For PvP, I would probably actually still stick with the Bellicose Interdictor. I don't know, I just think the Interdictor does more with what it has for fleet PvP, whereas the E-War here definitely I think is going to be a better solo ship, as long as they fix that power grid. I don't know, as I said, 484, that might be too low, the power grid. I'm not sure if it should be at the 705 like the Interdictor. Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the comment section down below whether the 705 megawatts of power grid is more than enough for the Bellicose Interdictor, or if the 484 is going to be insufficient. I think this is the kind of thing we need to be passing to the devs and catching ahead of time. Now, speaking of the comment section, I did tease that today was going to be our Combo Omega giveaway. 2 of you are in with a chance of winning a month of Combo Omega each. So, all you have to do to enter is literally comment down below which of these 4 ships that I've showcased today you are most excited or terrified by. Just basically pick one and let me know what it is about this ship that you like or you dislike. Just comment about one of these ships, that will enter you into the draw, and I will let you all know in Monday's video who won those, so that you can contact me and let me know what your in-game ID number is, because I've had a few people who have not contacted me back when I've called them out. I've either commented on their comment and said, you know, hey, congratulations, you've won, please let me know, or like last time I shouted out in a video, there are times when I've had that before and people haven't contacted me either, at which point I then have to pass it on to someone else. So congratulations, if you're not paying attention, you may miss out on the Combo Omega that you were lucky enough to win in the first place. Now, of course, that just means you really should be subscribed to this channel, and you want to ding that notification bell and hit the button that says all notifications. I put a video out every day, Monday to Friday, occasionally on a Saturday or Sunday if I absolutely have to. I do occasionally miss a day recently with how absolutely insane real life has been, but I do try to put out 5 days a week, so make sure you're checking out on those to get everything you need to know about Eve Echoes, and that you're making sure that you get to enter and win these Combo Omega prize giveaways. Anyway folks, thank you ever so much for watching this one right the way to the end. Do let me know which of these ships you're most excited about, which one you think is most disappointing, anything like that in the comment section down below. And again, the information I asked about the Bellicose Interdictor and the Bellicose E-War, let me know. I'd be really interested to know from someone who flies these a bit more than I do. I'm not really flying either of these on live, so yeah, let me know. Otherwise folks, thanks for watching, happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.